All right. Let's dive right in
Okay.
to Matthew 5:44.
Yeah.
And, we're not here to rehash the basics.
Right.
We know you guys are already using this in your ministries and sermons. And
Absolutely.
what we're after today are like the aha moments.
Yeah.
The fresh angles and sermon illustrations that can really make this come alive,
Yes.
for your congregations.
Very true.
And we've got some really interesting
Yeah.
sermon analyses
We do.
to kind of dig into that.
One of the things I thought was really interesting was how many pastors are focusing on neighbor.
Ooh.
It's one of those words we think we understand, but these sermons really push the boundaries of it.
It's easy to fall into that trap.
Yeah.
Neighbor equals person next door, case closed. But
Not quite.
not what Jesus had in mind.
Yeah, not even close.
Yeah.
One sermon that really brought this home for me was from Corinth Baptist Church.
Okay.
And they use this really interesting analogy of Comic-Con, the massive gathering for comic book and pop culture fans.
Yeah, I can picture it.
And what they point out is you've got this incredibly diverse crowd from, hardcore gamers to anime enthusiasts to people dressed up as superheroes.
It's a real mix.
It is a real mix of personalities and interests.
Yeah.
And what they highlight is that at Comic-Con, all these differences kind of melt away.
Yeah.
Everyone's connected by this shared passion, the sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize that our definition of neighbor can and should be far more expansive
Than we typically imagine.
Yeah,
So it's not just about
physical proximity.
physical proximity. It's about shared experiences, common ground,
Shared experience.
sense of connection.
That's right.
That's a really powerful way to reframe
It is.
the whole concept of neighbor.
And it has some really interesting implications for how we approach our communities, how we identify those neighbors that we're called to love.
Another church, Novation Church, took a really interesting approach
Oh, yeah.
with this.
They did.
They tapped into pop culture,
Right.
but instead of Comic-Con,
Yeah,
they drew on TV shows,
that's right.
which is really interesting.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they used examples from shows like Home Improvement, Full House, even The Simpsons
Wow.
to illustrate these various neighbor archetypes we encounter.
Okay, I have to admit, I'm intrigued.
Right.
Using TV shows to teach about loving your enemies, that's not something you see every day.
It's certainly a creative approach,
Yeah.
but what I found effective is that it brings these abstract concepts down to earth, makes them relatable.
Right.
It gets people thinking about the people they interact with every day,
Yeah.
those who might be challenging to love and asking, what would it look like to love this person even if they're the Ned Flanders of my life?
That's a good question for all of us to ask.
Yes.
Because let's be honest, loving your neighbor,
Yeah.
as lovely as it sounds in theory, often gets pretty messy
It does.
in practice.
Exactly. And that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. How do we actually take this radical teaching of loving our enemies and apply it to those real-life situations that test our patience and push our buttons?
Well, Community Baptist Church tackled this head on,
They did.
using examples that are all too familiar, I'm
Yeah.
sure, to anyone who's ever driven a car or
Right.
lived in a neighborhood.
Exactly.
Wait,
They
sorry.
talked about those everyday scenarios that can spark conflict.
Yeah.
Traffic incidents, noisy neighbors, property line disputes, those moments when our first instinct might not be love.
I can relate.
Yes.
Just last week, someone cut me off in traffic. And let's
Yeah.
just say my response
Yeah.
was not exactly aligned with
Yeah.
the Sermon on the Mount.
But that's precisely the point they're making. These everyday occurrences are the proving ground for this commandment. It's easy to talk about loving your enemies in the abstract. But how do we respond when their annoying neighbor starts blasting music at midnight? Or that driver cuts us off and flips us the bird?
Okay, so we're all on board with the idea
Right.
that loving our enemies is a good thing,
Yeah.
at least in theory.
Right.
But
Yeah.
some might say it's just not humanly possible. I mean, it goes
Yeah.
against our natural instincts, doesn't it?
That's where Granville Chapel's sermon offered a really interesting perspective.
Like-
They acknowledge that this command to love our enemies requires a superhuman kind of strength.
Okay.
It's not something we can muster up on our own.
So how do we tap into that strength? Where does it come from?
They used a striking metaphor.
Okay.
A Vancouver Canucks hockey player named Kevin Bieksa,
Okay.
who was known for his incredible strength and agility on the ice.
Wait, so they're comparing loving our enemies to being a professional athlete?
Yeah. It might seem like a strange comparison,
Yeah.
but what they were getting at is that this kind of love is a skill
Yeah.
that needs to be developed, honed, and strengthened.
Okay.
It requires a level of discipline and effort that goes beyond our natural inclinations.
So we need to train ourselves to love,
Yes.
almost like an athlete trains
Like an athlete.
for competition.
That's a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
And it ties into this key theme that emerged from a lot of these sermons, this transformative power of God's love. The Bridge Church, for instance, used this brilliant analogy of an unexpected first-class upgrade.
Oh.
You know, you're expecting economy and suddenly you're pampered in luxury.
Right.
That's the exceeding nature of God's love.
Yeah.
It goes above and beyond what we could ever imagine or deserve.
So it's not just about gritting our teeth and trying harder.
Yeah.
It's about tapping into a power that's greater than ourselves.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they went on to compare the discipline of loving our enemies to the dedication of Olympic athletes. The grueling training, the sacrifices they make, the single-minded focus.
Right.
It's all in pursuit of a goal that might seem impossible,
Yeah.
but the reward is profound.
Okay, so we're talking about a serious commitment here.
Yeah,
A radical way of living.
it is.
But what does that actually look like in practice? How do we move beyond the theory and actually transform our relationships, our communities, through this kind of love?
That's where Growing Together Ministry Worldwide sermon really caught my attention.
Okay.
They focus on the idea of turning enemies into allies through love and prayer. They stress this incredible ripple effect that can happen when we dare to approach those who've hurt us, those who oppose us, with love and a genuine desire for understanding. It's a powerful idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
Imagine those seemingly intractable conflicts, political divides, social injustices, even personal grudges. And consider the possibility that through persistent love and prayer, those very divisions could start to dissolve.
Sounds almost utopian.
It does.
But at the same time, there's something deeply compelling about it.
Yeah,
I mean, who wouldn't want to live in a world where enemies become allies?
that's right.
But I think for a lot of us,
Yeah.
the idea of praying for our enemies feels,
Right.
well, a little counterintuitive.
I understand that.
Yeah.
It can feel like we're letting them off the hook,
Yeah.
condoning their actions even.
Mm-hmm.
But these sermons push back against that notion pretty strongly.
Okay.
They argue that praying for your enemies isn't about excusing their behavior.
Right.
It's about recognizing their shared humanity, their brokenness,
Yeah.
just like ours.
So it's not about ignoring the wrong that's been done.
No,
It's about approaching the situation with a different lens,
that's right.
seeing the person behind the offense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's about tapping into that supernatural power we were talking about earlier,
Uh-huh.
that transformative love that only comes from God.
Right.
It's recognizing that ultimately it's not our job to judge or punish, but to love and to pray, trusting that God can work in their hearts in ways we might never fully comprehend.
Okay, so we've talked about redefining neighbor, finding practical ways to love the superhuman strengths required.
Yeah.
But one thing that struck me in these sermons was how they connected this ancient teaching to contemporary issues, even drawing parallels to figures and events outside the Bible,
Right.
which I thought was really interesting.
That's one of the things I find so fascinating about studying Scripture.
Mhm.
These timeless truths have this incredible ability to speak into our modern context, offering guidance and inspiration even for the most complex challenges we face today.
Absolutely. And one connection that really stood out to me was from Granville Chapel.
Okay.
They drew this powerful parallel between Matthew 5:44 and the civil rights movement.
It's such a fitting comparison, isn't it?
Yeah.
They highlighted the strategy of nonviolence,
Right.
the willingness to endure suffering and injustice without resorting to retaliation.
Right.
It's a powerful embodiment of loving your enemies in action.
Yeah.
Meeting hate with love.
Mhm.
Meeting violence with peace.
When you put it that way, it really drives home the radical nature of what Jesus is calling us to do.
It is radical.
It's not about passive acceptance.
Right?
It's about active resistance, but a resistance fueled by love, not hate.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets incredibly challenging,
Yeah.
but also incredibly powerful.
Right.
Because when you think about the courage and faith it took for those civil rights leaders to stand up to oppression with love as their weapon,
Yeah.
it really highlights the transformative potential of this commandment. It's a testament to the power of love to overcome hate, to break down barriers, to heal even the deepest wounds.
And Novation Church brought in a quote from Martin Luther that I found really thought-provoking.
Oh, yeah.
God doesn't need our good works, but people do.
Right?
It's a simple statement,
Yes.
but it carries so much weight,
It does.
especially in the context of loving our enemies.
It's a brilliant reminder, isn't it? That this isn't about earning brownie points with God.
Right.
It's about serving humanity, meeting the needs of those around us, even those who might not seem deserving.
Right.
It challenges us to look beyond ourselves, beyond our own comfort and convenience, and
Yeah.
ask, what does love require of me in this situation?
Right.
How can I be a conduit of God's love and grace, even to those who have wronged me?
And I think that's a question we need to be asking ourselves constantly.
Yes.
Not just in those dramatic moments of conflict,
Right?
but in the everyday interactions that make up our lives.
That's right.
Because it's in those seemingly small moments,
Yeah.
those choices between reacting with anger or responding with love,
Right.
that we truly put this radical teaching into practice.
It's about shifting our mindset,
Yeah.
moving away from that tit-for-tat mentality and embracing a posture of grace, of generosity, even when it feels difficult, even when it feels unfair.
So we've talked about the big picture,
Right.
the historical and social implications of loving our enemies. But I'm curious,
Yeah.
what practical advice did these sermons offer
Okay.
for actually living out this commandment in our daily lives?
Right.
I mean, let's face it, most of us aren't facing down oppressive regimes
Right.
or leading marches for social justice.
That's true.
But we all have those people in our lives
Yes.
who push our buttons, who make it hard to love.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And thankfully, these sermons didn't shy away from the nitty-gritty,
Yeah.
the practical side of applying this teaching.
Right.
One example that stuck with me was from Community Baptist Church.
Okay.
They challenged their congregation to think about those everyday situations that trigger frustration, anger, even resentment.
Okay. Give me an example.
They talked about something as simple as someone cutting you off in traffic.
Okay.
Your natural reaction might be to lay on the horn,
Right.
maybe even yell a few choice words.
Yeah.
But they encouraged their listeners to pause in that moment,
Okay.
to take a breath, and to ask themselves, what would it look like to respond with love right now?
Okay. I'm trying to picture this.
Yeah.
I'm stuck in traffic.
Right.
Someone just cut me off.
Yeah.
I'm feeling that surge of adrenaline and annoyance. What am I supposed to do?
Right.
Give them a thumbs up and a smile?
Well, maybe not.
Okay.
But the point is to interrupt that automatic reaction, that fight or flight response.
Yeah.
Maybe it's simply choosing not to honk the horn.
Right.
Maybe it's offering a silent prayer for that other driver.
Right?
Maybe it's reminding yourself that they're probably just as stressed and rushed as you are.
Yeah.
It's about finding a way to inject a little grace into that situation, to choose a response that aligns with the love we're called to embody.
It's about making a conscious choice, even in the heat of the moment, to react differently,
Yes.
to break that cycle of negativity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where that discipline we talked about comes into play.
Right.
It's training ourselves to respond with love even when it feels unnatural. Right.
Even when our emotions are screaming for a different reaction.
So it's not about suppressing those feelings.
No.
It's about choosing a different course of action.
That's great.
A response that reflects the love we're called to embody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they emphasize that it's not about being a doormat or letting people walk all over you. It's about setting healthy boundaries.
Right.
But doing so with a spirit of love and compassion, not anger or resentment.
Okay, so we've talked about the small everyday moments.
Yeah.
But what about those deeper hurts, those betrayals, those situations where it feels like love is simply impossible?
Right.
I mean, how can we possibly love someone who's deeply wronged us, who's caused us immense pain?
That's where it gets really tough.
Yeah.
There's no denying that.
Right.
And I think that's where we need to lean into that idea of superhuman strength, that reliance on a power that's greater than ourselves.
Right.
Granville Chapel, in their sermon, talked about the importance of surrendering those hurts to God.
Acknowledging our own inability to love perfectly.
Right.
And asking for his help.
So it's about recognizing our limitations,
Yes.
our human frailty,
Yeah.
and leaning into the grace and strength that only God can provide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about saying, God, I can't do this on my own. I need your help to love this person, to forgive this person, to see them through your eyes.
Right.
And they emphasize that it's not a one-time prayer. It's a continual process, a daily surrender of those hurts and resentments,
Yeah.
allowing God to work in our hearts and transform our perspective.
It's about releasing that bitterness,
Yes.
that anger, and allowing God's love to fill those empty spaces.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they offered a beautiful image for this process. I talk about it like like letting go of a helium balloon.
Okay.
You hold on to it for dear life, your grip getting tighter and tighter.
Yeah.
But the more you squeeze, the more it slips away.
Right.
And eventually you have to make a choice. Keep clinging with all your might, or let go and watch it soar.
So surrendering those hurts is like releasing that balloon,
Yes.
watching it float away, knowing that it's no longer our burden to carry.
It's a beautiful analogy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it highlights the freedom that comes with that surrender.
Yeah.
The peace that comes with letting go of those things that weigh us down, that poison our hearts.
It really is. It makes me think about the ripple effect that can happen
Yes.
when we choose to release those hurts,
Right.
when we choose to love instead of clinging to bitterness and resentment.
That's what Growing Together Ministry Worldwide really emphasized in their sermon.
Okay.
They talked about how that kind of radical love has the potential to not only transform our own hearts, but to actually impact those around us, even our enemies.
Mm-hmm.
They shared stories of people who had experienced incredible breakthroughs in their relationships,
Wow.
even reconciliations after choosing to pray for and love those who had hurt them.
So it's not just about inner peace. It's about creating outward change. About breaking those cycles of hurt and animosity
Yes.
that can plague families, communities,
Yes.
even entire societies.
It's a bold claim,
Yeah.
but the stories they shared were pretty compelling.
Right.
And it makes me think about the power of our example,
Uh-huh.
how the way we choose to love, even in the face of adversity, can have a profound impact on those around us.
It's like that Gandhi quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." It's not enough to just talk about love.
Right.
We have to live it out,
I do.
even when it's hard, even when it feels impossible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's what these sermons ultimately challenged us to do,
Yeah.
to move beyond the platitudes, beyond the theoretical, and to actually embody this radical love in our daily lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive
Yeah.
on Matthew 5:44,
All right.
I'm wondering, what are some key takeaways,
Okay.
some actionable steps that pastors and Bible study leaders
Yeah.
can bring back to their congregations?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's about challenging that narrow definition of neighbor,
Yeah.
encouraging our congregations to look beyond their immediate circle,
Right.
to see the other, the stranger, the outsider, as someone worthy of love and compassion.
Uh-huh.
Maybe that's using those pop culture references we talked about,
Right.
like Comic-Con or
Mhm.
TV shows, to spark conversation and challenge preconceived notions.
It's about expanding that circle of empathy.
Yes.
Recognizing that everyone, regardless of their background, their beliefs, their behaviors,
That's right.
is a child of God.
Yes.
Deserving of dignity and respect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then it's about equipping our congregations with practical tools for actually living out this love.
Okay.
Talking about those everyday scenarios that trigger negative reactions.
Right.
Those moments when we're tempted to respond with anger or judgment,
Uh-huh.
and offering alternative ways to engage.
Right.
Maybe it's teaching about the power of pausing, taking a breath, offering a silent prayer before reacting.
Mhm.
Maybe it's sharing stories of people who have found freedom and healing through forgiveness and reconciliation.
It's about meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
Recognizing that loving our enemies isn't a one-size-fits-all proposition.
Right.
It's about offering a variety of approaches, a toolkit of sorts
Yes.
that people can draw from
Right?
based on their own personalities and circumstances.
Exactly.
And then finally, I think it's crucial to emphasize the importance of leaning on God's strength,
Yes.
of surrendering those hurts and resentments that make it so difficult to love.
That's right.
Teaching about the power of prayer, the transformative power of God's grace,
Yes.
can be incredibly empowering for those who feel stuck in cycles of bitterness and anger.
It's about reminding people they're not alone in the struggle,
Right.
that there's a source of strength and love available to them if they're willing to tap into it.
It's a message of hope, ultimately.
It is.
A message that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges,
Yeah.
even in those relationships that feel broken beyond repair, love has the power to heal, to restore, to redeem.
That's a message worth sharing. A message that can truly change the world one heart at a time.
So as you go forth, leading your congregations and Bible studies,
Yeah.
keep wrestling with this challenging but beautiful teaching.
Yes.
Keep exploring those unique perspectives, those fresh angles, those sermon illustrations that can make Matthew 5:44 come alive for those you serve.
Right.
And remember, you're not alone in this journey.
We're all in this together.
We're all in this together, striving to embody this radical love to be the change we long to see in the world.